Hello everyone, this is Gabe Nudwick with my week 4 presentation for MPA 594 Comprehensive Exam Seminar for California Baptist University for Dr. Sundstrom's class. And this is my presentation on the public versus private agencies and their missions. So the government and the private sector agencies that I chose are kind of the umbrella of law enforcement. It can be any department, but law enforcement in general, and then the private sector counterpart, I guess, of private security, which I have some experience in. So I'll be talking about those and about how Graham Allison asked if these public versus private are alike in all unimportant respects. The three themes that I'm going to touch on here are going to be the themes of how bureaucracy plays a part of all of this, funding, and then the scope or the limitations of the two entities here. So we'll be touching on those and some theories that relate to them. So the first theme is going to be of bureaucracy, and obviously we'll talk about Max Weber and how he defines bureaucracy of having the supervision of the lower offices by the higher offices, and how the one note he makes in here is that the private enterprise of a bureau is called an office, which we can see. Just a small little point. In the public sector, they have more of this expert training that Weber touches on. In the private sector, there is training, but it's not as intense or defined like in the public sector. For law enforcement, there's academies that they go to, training like that, whereas private security, it might be a class or something like that. Obviously, there's state mandated licenses that need to be held to ensure that people are licensed to do the jobs that they're doing and things like that. But again, there's more of that expert training that Weber touches on. Another theorist is Downs, and he talks in his life cycle of bureaus about these zealots and how they'll come along to kind of revitalize the bureau. And especially as we look at society now with all these calls for people to defund the police, change things, and all the issues going on, we need to have these, as Downs talks about, these zealots come around to revitalize law enforcement and kind of bring it back into the respect that people need to have for it to continue their mission, so that it just doesn't become stagnant. These zealots that Downs talks about are really vital to keeping the bureaus, any bureaus, growing and moving in their life cycles. Along the same lines as Weber, Gulick talks about the work division and the volume of the work. Obviously, if in the public sector, if you have law enforcement, just the sheer volume of work they're covering, cities, counties, towns, whatever, and private security covers whatever they're contracted to protect or serve or patrol. It's just the scope of it is just so much different. So yeah. Funding, the theme here. Obviously, Wilson talks about the dichotomy of how excuse me, how it's government in action. It's the everyday job of the everyday job of the Bureau of Law Enforcement here. He talks about government having few masters that they serve, and obviously law enforcement is under the umbrella of the county or the state that they're in, which is under the umbrella of the government as a whole. And obviously with like police chiefs, every time we have elections, well, not every time, but when we have elections, we'll vote on our elected official who could be the police chief, and that's the tie to the government there. And then from there, they're the ones who are actually finding the administrators, who are lieutenants, officers, things like that. Grods, whatever. He touches on the whole federalism marble cake idea and how it's not just one level, it's all intermixed, and that's why we get the whole marble cake idea. And this is how it relates again with law enforcement. We've got the elected official, but they're not just doing one role, and it's not just law enforcement. They're working together with counties and other regulations and other bodies and things like that, and it all just mixes together. Also with in the Constitution, in Article 1, Section 8, it talks about not specifically law enforcement, but we get kind of an idea of it when it talks about how the militia is there to execute the laws of the Union. It's not talking, obviously in the Constitution, it doesn't say police officers need to do this, that sort of thing, but it's where we get the mandate and the idea of what law enforcement is, going all the way back to the Constitution there. And even David Rosenblum talks about this idea of maximizing the efficiency and the effectiveness and the economy of an agency. So this is what law enforcement does. They get their federal funding from like taxpayers and that sort of thing, and then they're looking for ways to take this taxpayer money and use it as best they can to serve the people. The scope and limitations between law enforcement and private security. Obviously, the biggest limitation or the scope here is when Riddle and Weber talk about the wicked problems versus the tame problems. Law enforcement is dealing with those wicked problems of society, things that other people aren't necessarily thinking about or dealing with, but they're out there patrolling. They're dealing with homelessness. They're dealing with people and drug abuse, that sort of thing. It's the big difference here. Obviously, in private security, we deal with the tame problems. We just deal with people who aren't supposed to be in a certain area, whereas these wicked problems that are in society are dealt with every day through law enforcement agencies. Alice Rivlin talks about this in her Systematic Thinking for Social Action article. She talks about this community control, which just goes straight to the heart of law enforcement. It's the community kind of taking care of itself. You've got these law enforcement officers out there keeping the community safe, and it's this decentralization of government. It's actually in the city. It's doing the job of protecting people. Michael Lipsky talks about this street level bureaucracy, which, I mean, you can just take that whole phrase and it just goes straight to law enforcement. It's street level bureaucracy. It's dealing with these wicked problems. It's dealing with this these ways of, like Rosenblum was talking about, this efficiency and taking it down to people, their everyday life, and how it's making things better, keeping things safe, and keeping everybody doing what they're supposed to. So going back to Graham Allison's idea of are these public and private entities alike in all unimportant respects? Well, these unimportant respects are, the main heart of it is keeping people safe, which is important, but it's so much more, because the public agencies here, it's getting the funding that's been entrusted to them from people, from the government as a whole, about what they're going to do to fulfill their mandate of, in this example, keeping people safe and protected and things like that. So it's not unimportant, obviously, but it's just such a big difference. The scope of what these differences are is just huge. So it's again that whole marble cake of going back to everything kind of working together to work seamlessly. It's not these levels or this layer. It's just everything coming down to solve these wicked problems in society. So sorry, this was a little long-winded, but I do appreciate you watching, and I hope you all have a great week.